And here at home now, it's the ITV News at 10.
Clinging on here against all the odds, could there be a more embattled PM trying to stay in office?
Is it over, Mr. Shapps?
There might have been a string of his own cabinet telling him the game is up, but tonight he is in no mood to listen. Within the last hour, Michael Gove has been sacked. At Prime Minister's questions earlier, it was backbenchers who put it to him straight.
Does the Prime Minister think there are any circumstances in which he should resign?
Today, I ask him to do the honourable thing.
Take responsibility and resign.
His resigning Health Secretary said enough was enough.
Treading the tightrope between loyalty and integrity has become impossible in recent months. And now this week again, we have reason to question the truth and integrity of what we've all been told.
And at a committee hearing, the skewering came from all sides.
If you have lost the confidence of your MPs and you're required to step down as leader of the Conservative Party, you will not seek to dissolve Parliament.
Well, I think the last thing this country needs,
because this House,
but I'm not going to step down.
All this on top of 42 resignations, a record number for any British Prime Minister in history. But tonight, whatever his cabinet has told him, Boris Johnson is defiant. When so many in Westminster are already saying it's over, how can he stay? Tonight we'll take you through all the drama of the day, not least the lack of a fully functioning government, and try to work out what comes next. What has been going on behind the door tonight? One cabinet minister is still resolutely loyal. But in Parliament, fury and frustration amongst Tory MPs as the party tears itself apart. Rumours leadership candidates already plotting who could be the man or woman who comes next. And kicking off the Euros in style, the Lionesses were roaring tonight.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham in Downing Street.
Good evening from Downing Street, where the Prime Minister is brazening it out after one of the most turbulent days in British politics. The drama continues even now with the news in the last hour that the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, has been sacked. Earlier, Boris Johnson had spent the best part of a bruising day fending off every effort to prise him from power, which continued even behind the door of number 10, where a number of close cabinet colleagues tried to persuade him to go. Across the day, not just hour by hour, but at times literally minute by minute, his power had seemed to be draining away. He started Prime Minister's questions on the front foot, but soon the onslaught began. Deadly questions and attacks, even from his own side. A 2-hour skewering at the Parliamentary Liaison Committee. And all the time, the engulfing tsunami of resignations, 42 in total and counting, the biggest number ever for a British Prime Minister. But despite all this, Boris Johnson is still refusing to quit, and tonight his counter-attack began.
Digging in behind this door, the Prime Minister tonight not willing to hear what his party is trying to tell him. As tourists gathered outside Downing Street to watch the drama unfold, this evening the Prime Minister fought back, sacking his Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove, one of several members of his cabinet, including the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps,
the government collapsing, Mr. Shapps,
and the Welsh Secretary Simon Hart, who told him the game was up.
Do you regret saying that you'd be Chancellor of the Exchequer, Mrs. Zahawi?
But reports his newly appointed Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi was among them were denied by number 10. And there are still those, aside from ultra-loyalist Nadine Dorries, prepared to support him to the bitter end.
Has my full support.
Earlier in the day, Boris Johnson gave a defiant wave as he left for Prime Minister's questions. But to ever-increasing numbers in his party, he's a leader who's run out of answers. As his convoy headed into Parliament, the resignations from his government continued to roll in. His greatest danger now, not the delighted benches opposite him, but the frozen faces of the party behind him. Characteristic of him that he tried to make light of it.
This morning, Mr. Speaker, I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I expect I shall have further such meetings later today.
But that laughter soon died with this.
What a pathetic spectacle. The dying act of his political career is to parrot that nonsense. Yep. And as for those who are left, only in office because no one else is prepared to debase themselves any longer, the charge of the lightweight brigade.
The faces of the remaining loyalists on his front bench showing they were not enjoying the line of attack. And then one after the other, his own backbenchers wielded the knife.
Does the Prime Minister think there are any circumstances in which he should resign?
Today, I ask him to do the honourable thing.
Take responsibility and resign.
Frankly, Mr. Speaker, the job of a Prime Minister in difficult circumstances when he's been handed a colossal mandate is to keep going, and that's what I'm going to do.
But how long can he go on? With ministers deserting him so fast, it's hard to keep score. It started with his health secretary, followed by the Chancellor. By the end of yesterday, 8 others had joined them. Before breakfast today, Ministers Laura Trott and Will Quince also resigned. The total so far stands at 42, leaving some entire departments with no ministers below cabinet level.
Morning, Mr. Javid.
The man who started it all looked pretty buoyant as he left to tell everyone why he'd had to go.
Treading the tightrope between loyalty and integrity has become impossible in recent months. And, Mr. Speaker, I will never risk losing my integrity. And now this week again, we have reason to question the truth and integrity of what we've all been told. And at some point, we have to conclude that enough is enough.
The Prime Minister looked into the middle distance, the expressions on the faces of his party reflecting the peril he's in. As well as the ticking tally of resignations, the letters of no confidence in the Prime Minister's leadership are piling up. This afternoon he had to face a committee of MPs where 8 out of the 9 Tories questioning him had already withdrawn their support.
Prime Minister, how's your week going?
Terrific. Like many others.
One committee member on his phone on the left here actually sent his letter of no confidence while the Prime Minister was sitting in front of him.
I need you to answer this question, Prime Minister.
And with you.
The chair keen to establish that the Prime Minister is prepared to stand down rather than call an early election.
If you have lost the confidence of your MPs and you're required to step down as leader of the Conservative Party, you will not seek to dissolve Parliament.
Well, I think the last thing this country needs, but I'm not going to step down, and the last thing this country needs, frankly, is election.
And still his day was about to get worse.
It's being reported that there's a delegation of your cabinet colleagues waiting in Downing Street, including the Chief Whip, the Transport Secretary and your new Chancellor, waiting to tell you when you finish here today that it's time for you to go.
But those amongst them who hoped to force him out tonight have failed in their mission. The Northern Ireland Secretary, the latest to go in. Having survived this impossible day, the Prime Minister still has some faint vestiges of power left, and he's going to use every last ounce of it. Romilly Weeks, News at 10.
Well, Paul is here with me after a pretty relentless day. It's certainly not over yet, is it, Paul? We've no idea precisely what's going on right now, but lots of rumours and murmurings coming out from behind that door.
Yeah, this evening, Julie, it essentially feels as if Boris Johnson is trying to stage a hold-up inside Number 10, absolutely refusing to resign and even holding to the head of his party this threat of calling an election if they try to force his hand, if they try to force him out. And all evening we've had this steady stream, as well as the protesters at the front of the gate, of cabinet ministers coming in and out of Number 10, trying to deploy their best negotiating skills, and sort of polite persuasion seems to be their preferred technique here. I understand, for example, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, when he met with the Prime Minister, said, look, it would just be a far more dignified end if you step down now. You're not going to win a second confidence vote. Another cabinet member told me that she had tried to convince the Prime Minister MPs in to Downing Street. In fact, they're trying to frame the scene for 10. This is a battle between the Parliament and the people, but his mandate from 2019 cannot be over.
It's a bit difficult to hear you at the moment, Paul. We will talk to you again very shortly. Thank you very much for the moment for that. A lot of noise at the end of Downing Street tonight. Quite the atmosphere here. It is out in the perhaps quieter Tory heartlands, of course, of the shires and the suburbs where the sheer electability of Boris Johnson was once his and the Conservative Party's greatest asset. It was this quality that in 2019, along with the Red Wall, of course, that brought home the Tories' biggest majority since the days of Margaret Thatcher. Today, many MPs representing those voters were saying that unless something is done, they fear the party's public image could be damaged beyond repair.
If you wanted a front row seat to the biggest drama in town, then today these slightly bemused tourists outside Parliament had bagged prime position. They watched on as Westminster whipped itself into a frenzy, struggling to keep up with every twist and turn as Conservative MPs held the Prime Minister's fate in their hands. Do you think it's all over now for the Prime Minister?
This was a really tragic moment, and I supported Boris Johnson. I worked to help him get an 80-seat majority. This is a really tragic moment. I'm very sorry it's come to this.
What do you think should happen?
Let's see what happens. There's a meeting of the 1922 committee at 5 p.m. that I think is going to be addressed by Dominic Raab. Let's see what the mood is at the 22 at 5 o'clock.
What's the mood in the party right now, do you think?
As I say, let's see what the mood is at 5 o'clock.
Thanks, Mark. Maria Miller.
I'm so sorry, we're actually in the middle of doing a photograph.
Just a very quick question.
No, I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of a meeting.
Inside Parliament, others were less reluctant to speak their minds, as MPs who backed Boris Johnson just 4 weeks ago now called for him to go.
So I've never done this before. I've never, ever voted against a sitting Prime Minister. I think he needs to listen to the MPs. I regard myself as a loyal Conservative, and I found this very, very difficult to do. But I've had enough. The public have had enough.
Given how loyal you've been to Boris Johnson, given he has relied on your loyalty, it could be MPs like yourself that tip him over the edge here. How do you feel about that?
I feel awful. I gutted. I feel like I'm letting a friend down. That's what I feel like. It's not a nice thing to do. This is supposed to be like a family.
I brought my children up to tell the truth. Even if they did something wrong, the worst thing they could do was to lie about it. Lying was worse than the original offence, and therefore I can't countenance somebody that looks as if they've been lying.
And the dozens and dozens of government resignation letters that have rolled in relentlessly since last night show the strength of feeling. MP Andrew Morrison said Mr Johnson's position is unrecoverable. Virginia Crosby said he cannot be trusted to tell the truth. John Glenn, one of several who said the country deserves better, while Joe Churchill labelled the Prime Minister self-serving.
Under current Conservative Party rules, Boris Johnson is safe for a year, having won that confidence vote last month. But given his collapse in support today, Tory MPs on the 1922 committee met in a room at the top of these stairs to discuss changing those rules so they can hold a new vote. They will make their final decision next week, hoping it won't get that far.
And finding Tory MPs today willing to say they'd support him in another vote was not easy. Are you still supporting the Prime Minister?
Oh, absolutely. I think he's doing a great job, and I think he'll lead us into the next general election.
Seriously?
Absolutely.
Why do so many of your colleagues now disagree with you, though, Peter Bone? You are increasingly in a minority, aren't you?
Well, I think that's unfair. I don't think I'm in a minority. What's happened is that a few have resigned from government.
But even those cabinet ministers who haven't quit hardly sound convinced.
Do you have confidence in him? The Prime Minister is absolutely still in place. He's still kept me in my role, and I will continue to serve that.
But tonight the odds don't look good for Boris Johnson. Any takers on that?
80% of bets have gone on him to leave in 2022 in the last 24 hours.
The punters have made up their minds, whatever the Prime Minister now tells his party.
Trying to stay, or is it better to hang on?
Well, Dan, the 1922 do still have power. The question is how they will wield it.
That's right, Julie. Well, today, at one point, there was real talk that the 22 committee would change the rules today to hold a second vote as soon as possible. Such was the anger and frustration with Boris Johnson. They opted not to. Why? Well, next week they'll elect a new executive committee. There was one thought that they want that committee to have a fresh mandate to look again at these rules. But there was two big factors at play here for the committee today. One, by delaying it by a week, they allowed cabinet ministers to go to Downing Street, go to Boris Johnson and plead with him to say, look, you've lost your support, you've got to go. That clearly, Julie, hasn't worked. The second factor was that they thought the mere threat of changing the rules next week would be enough to persuade Boris Johnson, that it would give him a dignified exit. They did the same 3 years ago with Theresa May. When she won a confidence vote, her popularity ebbed away, they threatened to change the rules, and instead she quit. Boris Johnson is ignoring that too. He's saying to them, if you want to kick me out, you're going to have to change these rules. You're going to have to fight me again. You're going to have to go through another confidence vote. So that threat right now hasn't worked. But for those who are standing up for that committee, those on that committee right now are clear. They will change those rules next week if Boris Johnson is still in Downing Street.
OK, Dan, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, we check in with Robert now, who's in his studio in West London ahead of his programme tonight. Plenty to talk about for sure, Robert. This isn't just a crisis for Boris Johnson, but it's a crisis for functioning government. What's your take at this stage of the evening?
So, one of the reasons why a number of ministers, including the Uber loyalist Grant Shapps, Transport Secretary, who actually helped Boris Johnson to get in to Downing Street in 2019, he was his election campaign manager back then. I mean, he said to Boris Johnson today, so many people, quality people, have resigned from your team and you're going to struggle to replace them. You can't govern anymore. And he was not the only member of his government to say, look, this is not us saying we don't like you anymore, but, you know, it's a practical issue. If you cannot form a proper government, you can't be in charge, and you've got to make way for somebody who has the confidence of the Parliamentary Party. But as Dan has just pointed out, we are in really astonishing times. I mean, the Tory party has been damaged by those illegal parties in Downing Street, by the Chris Pincher affair. You know, that's the fact that the deputy chief whip has been accused of groping people. And now we've got this spectacle of the Prime Minister not adhering to what so many of his ministers and his MPs want him to do, which is to step down, but vowing to fight his own party. Prime Minister versus Parliamentary Party. This is a spectacle for the Tory party, which cannot do it any good. And when I talk tonight to senior Tory MPs, they say things from just this is awful, this is terrible, to this is deranged. So I do think the next few days are going to be some of the most extraordinary we've witnessed in British politics. On my show later on tonight, I've got the first, I think, a person who attends Cabinet to sort of speak out since these late-breaking developments that the Prime Minister wants to try and rebuild his team and is vowing to fight on. It's the Attorney General, Suella Braverman. It'll be absolutely fascinating to hear what she has to say. I've also got Matt Hancock on the show, who, until recently, has been, again, a tremendous loyalist for Boris Johnson. Will he still be standing behind the Prime Minister? So, you know, what we are witnessing is history. Earlier on today, I pointed out that the maths are terrible for the Prime Minister. If you just look, there was 148 MPs who just a few weeks ago said they had no confidence in the Prime Minister. 40-odd have resigned from the government. It looks almost... I mean, the maths looks terrible for him. It looks as though certainly a good half of his party now want him to go, maybe more than that, and significant numbers of ministers already resigning, more to go. He sacked Michael Gove, one of his closest allies. The word crisis seems to me to understate what we are currently seeing in this government.
You can certainly say that again, Robert. Thank you very much indeed for that. We will see you later. Well, to see a breakdown of exactly who is backing the PM and who's called on him to go, visit our website, itv.com/news. And, of course, we are updating that as it goes. So, with Boris Johnson's leadership currently hanging by a thread, who could potentially replace him? Well, the first Tory female Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, has long been a darling among party grassroots. Appointed only yesterday as Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi has been on the rise since his successful stint overseeing the rollout of the COVID vaccines. Ben Wallace polls as a favourite in Cabinet among Tory members. He's considered to have performed well in response to the Ukraine war. Sajid Javid was the first to submit his resignation yesterday and has previously stood as a leadership candidate, although coming only fourth in 2019. Rishi Sunak was once the clear favourite to succeed Johnson with his performance during the pandemic, but may have fallen out of favour following his Partygate fine and controversy over his wife's non-dom tax status. And, of course, Jeremy Hunt came second to Boris Johnson in the last leadership contest, but has made it clear that he'd run again. And Penny Mordaunt is perhaps not one of the most well-known names among potential candidates, but tonight bookies rate her as joint favourite to succeed Boris Johnson. So we can have a talk about that list. Paul's back here with a slightly different microphone, hoping we can hear you clearly this time. Well, no, it's the noise is off, I think. Paul, OK, talk to us about this list.
Yeah, so it's far too early at this stage, of course, to pick out any favourites. In fact, history tells us that front-runners in leadership contests often fall at the first hurdle. It happened to Boris Johnson, actually, before he subsequently went on to become Prime Minister. I think what is clear at this stage, though, is there's a sort of divide in the strategies here between the candidates. Those who think it's better to drop out early from Boris Johnson's government, like Sajid Javid, for example, to show what they would say is integrity, principles, hoping that that wins round the rebels in the party who'll then back them later, or to take sort of Nadhim Zahawi's strategy of staying in the club, of demonstrating loyalty, of hoping that that brings people with them later. And then there are also some wildcards out there at the moment. I mean, we didn't mention Steve Baker, for example, earlier on. I'm told tonight he's leader of, or he was leader of the Eurosceptic group of MPs in Parliament, of course, very famous during the whole Brexit debacle in Parliament. He may well run for the leadership. So at this stage, you know, things are incredibly fluid, but all of these strategies are now forming the backdrop to what's happening to Boris Johnson and who's resigning and who's not, and will continue to form the backdrop as we head into a leadership contest, which now seems fairly inevitable.
OK, Paul, thank you very much for the moment. Back again a bit later. Well, joining us now is James Duddridge, Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Prime Minister, and perhaps unsurprisingly in that role, one of his staunch supporters. Mr Duddridge, first of all, tell us something about the mood behind us in number 10 tonight.
Well, the Prime Minister's actually in quite buoyant mood. Clearly it's difficult listening to criticism. He's spoken to a large number of his cabinet, but he's up for a fight. He's optimistic. He's doing the reshuffle now, appointing people into the vacant roles. You know, he's listened and he's got a plan. Some of that plan I know, some of that plan I don't. I do know that next week Nadhim Zahawi as Chancellor and he will be making a joint announcement on the economy in particular. That will include tax cuts. I don't have any detail to give you at this stage. It will include looking at regulation and reducing regulation, and also look at delivering some of the Brexit benefits we've been talking about. But the tax cuts in particular will be really good news for Tory backbenchers.
But Mr Duddridge, it seems extraordinary that you're talking in those terms tonight when it looks almost unsurvivable. I mean, by any measure, from what we're hearing at Westminster tonight, if this goes to a confidence vote, there just aren't the numbers there to support the Prime Minister, let alone those to fill vacant roles in his government.
Well, the Prime Minister feels he has a 14 million mandate from the last general election. And let's remember, you know, he was not likely to win. This is a parliamentary democracy,
Mr Duddridge. It's not a presidency.
No, absolutely. But he has that mandate. He delivered the London mayoral elections against all odds from what had previously been, you know, quite strong Labour, Socialist, Independent control. And he thinks he can do it today, again. Now, if the vote were today, I think it would be really, really tough. But there isn't a vote today. There has to be a vote next week on changing the 1922 committee. Sorry.
So you must be across the figures. In the end, these things come down to the raw statistics. How many votes would he get tonight? How many MPs are in the Prime Minister's column?
I don't know exactly, but what I can say is he would get far fewer votes tonight than next week or the week after, because people would have seen changes. I don't know the detail, but we can expect changes. They would have seen the changes in cabinet. They would see the new tax cuts and the plan for the economy, and no doubt you'll hear more from the new team. This is a big reset which everyone's being called for, and I think that will bring people back on board.
But we've only got 2 weeks before the parliamentary recess. I mean, if you had your own wish for the timetable, that may or may not be true. But in the time that we've got left, in the time that it appears the 1922 is planning to operate, he's not going to get his numbers. And what happens then? He has got to go.
I only caught some of the question, but I think I got the essence of it. 2 weeks is an enormous amount of time. Today has been a long day, an awful lot's happened. Things could look different in 2 weeks, and that will be after the tax cuts and many, many interviews like this.
Can I just ask you about a matter of your own conscience with this? We heard a very vivid, compelling speech from the former Health Secretary in the House today. He was talking about integrity, talking about things enough is enough, he said, on his matter of conscience, assessing whether he could continue to serve. Is that something that's crossed your mind, Mr Duddridge?
I think the Prime Minister is the right person to lead. I wouldn't use the word used, but I have every respect for him, and colleagues can use their own words. I think the Prime Minister is the right person to take this country forward. I think a leadership election would be incredibly messy, and some of my colleagues should look at what the other possibilities are. Everyone's wishing for a particular possibility in their own minds, an individual candidate, but who is likely to be a leader if there is a leadership election after. So I think lots of people, if this does pan out the way they think they want, will be disappointed in the outcome. And I think Boris Johnson is the right person for the job. He's delivered for us before, he's delivered for the country, he's delivered for the party, he can do so again.
And he is prepared to fight his party for that?
He's going to fight for what he believes is right, which is standing up for the 14 million people that voted for him. It's standing up to Vladimir Putin. It's delivering on the cost of living through tax cuts and a number of other measures. He's up for it. He's fighting.
James Duddridge, thank you very much indeed for joining us on News at 10. Thank you. Well, Boris Johnson, as we were just hearing from James Duddridge there, says he wants to stay on to begin rebuilding the economy. But while he was defiantly holding on to Downing Street, the new neighbour at number 11 was trying to come to terms with the scale of that task. The new Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi, has the rather large responsibility of trying to steer the British economy out of the spiralling cost of living crisis. All around the country, including in the Tory party's own heartlands, there are millions of people trying to cope with galloping inflation, rising prices and the rapidly increasing cost of energy.
Northallerton in North Yorkshire, the constituency seat of Rishi Sunak, now an ex-Chancellor. It's traditional Tory here, but people feel up against it and some of their anger is directed at government.
They don't live in the real world. The multimillionaires, most of them, they're not going to feel the pinch. They're not going to go to the petrol station so they think, heck, it's nearly £2, I'm not going to fill up. These price increases are just crippling small businesses.
I think they could do a bit more to help out, especially with the fuel, with the amount you pay on tax on fuel is obviously a lot.
Enter a new Chancellor with a promise to turn things around. Nadhim Zahawi got an hour-long briefing last night from the Prime Minister who appointed him.
We spent that hour talking about how we're going to rebuild the economy, how we're going to share the evidence with the nation, how we're going to return to growth of the economy, how we're going to bear down on inflation.
His aims are noble. They're also identical to those of his predecessor at the Treasury, whose priority was also to tame inflation. Rishi Sunak's plan was that the Bank of England would raise interest rates to relieve the upward pressure on prices, while he would limit the need for interest rate rises by keeping government debt and borrowing as low as possible. This strategy put him at odds with his Prime Minister. Boris Johnson's instincts are to borrow more, tax less and do more to help those who are struggling with the cost of living. Businesses in particular want more tax breaks.
The new Chancellor needs to make sure that policy to encourage investment works even harder. That means making permanent the temporary super deduction on capital investment. It means reversing the rise in employers' national insurance contributions.
Nadhim Zahawi is already signalling that next year's corporation tax rise may get shelved. He may also decide to make the financial support for households to help pay higher energy bills more generous.
In the near term, there's already a big package for households. It could be added to, but doing so would increase the risk that would cause more inflation. Over the longer term, there's clearly a desire to try and cut taxes, or at least stop them from rising so much, but to do so would require spending less.
Amid the political chaos, sterling slipped again against the dollar. A falling pound pushes up the price of the food and the energy we import yet further, exacerbating the squeeze on living standards that the government is trying to address. John Hills, News at 10.
In other news tonight, the huge problems currently facing global security were laid bare today in an unprecedented joint statement by the bosses of the British and American domestic security services. Problems caused not just by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but it's claimed by China. The heads of MI5 and the FBI warned not only of the threat to global business from a possible invasion of Taiwan, but of Beijing's covert activities. They called its interference in the daily lives of people all around the world a game-changing challenge. It looks like more disruption is in the pipeline tonight for Britain's beleaguered air travellers. British Airways announced it's axing another 10,300 short-haul flights between now and the end of October. It means the airline will have cancelled 13% of its flights this summer. BA's schedules have been among the worst affected by the recent combination of increased demand and staff shortages. The company says that by consolidating some of its quieter services, it hopes to protect as many holiday flights as possible. Now, England's women's football team opened the Euro 2022 tournament at Old Trafford tonight with a win. The build-up to the tournament, which is expected to be attended by record crowds, has seen the Lionesses widely regarded as amongst the favourites to win it. But the host nation were made to work hard by their opponents, Austria, managing a narrow 1-0 victory thanks to Beth Mead's first-half goal.
Players and fans alike all hoping this evening would be the start of something very special. A full house at Old Trafford, the vast majority urging the Lionesses to get these home Euros off to a flying start.
I'm excited and England's gonna win!
If they underestimated the significance of the occasion, the Lionesses' arrival at the ground would have changed that. Before the main event, a smoke-filled pre-show party to get these Euros up and running. And then it was down to business. Controlled Beth Mead put the Lionesses ahead, but only just. It's what dreams are made of. Moss was looking a little concerned. Another sub, Chloe Kelly, marauding from midfield, came close too. And on the rare occasion Austria threatened, they found Mary Earps at full stretch.
And that's it.
And that's how it ended, a solid, if not spectacular start from England, but most importantly, a win.
I think the chances are really high because they played really well tonight, and if they keep playing like this then they'll do well.
I really enjoyed it. Everyone was having such a good time. It was really good.
I feel like it was a bit of a shaky start, but I think they grew into the game, they kept the cool and they did what they needed to do, which was 3 points.
So the unbeaten run continues in front of a record Euros crowd. All in all, not a bad night's work. Next up, next week, it's Norway and Brighton. Steve Scott, News at 10, Manchester.
And Paul is with me here just for a final sum up. It ain't over yet, is it, Paul? A long way.
No, and you know, throughout the past 7 months of scandals, from Partygate through to Chris Pincher, the underlying issue has been one of truth. And many would argue tonight that Boris Johnson has a fresh problem with the truth, his inability to face up to it. That truth is that he has lost the confidence of a huge swathe of his party, of a significant swathe of his cabinet, and yet he is digging in. He is determined to carry on. Too soon still to write him off. He's made an art of overcoming the impossible, but he will have to be dragged out of number 10, and the concern among his party is who else, what else he's willing to drag down with him.
OK, Paul, thank you very much indeed for all of your insight this evening. And that is all for tonight from 10 Downing Street after a day of fluctuating drama. Behind the famous door, Boris Johnson tonight remains defiant. He has sacked Michael Gove as his reshuffle begins, insisting he will stay on to focus on what he calls the hugely important issues facing Britain. But the 42 colleagues who have quit and many other members of Parliament from his own side see his future as a hugely important issue. Some plotters have already started to map out leadership campaigns. The drama is far from over. From all of us on News at 10, good night.